As I mentioned in another video, I've been kind of playing around with Supabase on a side project, and I wanted to walk you through how I set up authentication using Supabase. Now, I will say I'm just using the email password authentication, but they do provide, I think, OAuth sign-ins, such as like Google or Discord or GitHub. But let's just go ahead and walk you through how I got this set up with the email authentication in case you have an application and a requirement where you have to do email signups. Let's just go ahead and make an account. So in fact, I'll go to sign up down here and I will do my email and I'll type in a default password. And when you click submit, this is actually going to send out an email confirmation. Now, I do want to say I'm running all of the Supabase Docker container stuff locally. And when you do that, there's actually a in-bucket URL you can open up. And this is where the emails are going to be sent. So you actually have to go in here and you have to confirm the email by clicking on this link. And when you do, it's going to redirect you back to your app. It's going to provide a code. And assuming you have everything set up properly, you can see that I actually have a session set up, right? I can click on this and you can tell I'm logged in. I got a profile and I got a sign up button. So how exactly does this work and how hard is it to get set up? It's actually not too difficult, especially if you're using Next.js. So let's go ahead and first of all, I'm going to take you to the middleware function of how this whole thing is set up. Okay, so provided from Supabase, there is a create middleware client you can bring in. And your middleware function, if you're using the app router in Next.js, which I am, your middleware function basically needs to create that middleware client, pass in rec and res, and then you have to get the session, and then you return res here. So basically, before every single route, this is going to, I think, refresh your session so that it doesn't expire, which is why you have to kind of set up this matcher here to say, hey, ignore like API endpoints or static endpoints, image assets, fav icon, etc. Because we don't want this middleware function running for all these other like non-authenticated related endpoints, right? Okay, so that's the first step. You set up a middleware function. So let's look at the sign up page. I have a sign up directory with a page file in it. How does this work? Okay, so this is basically just a form which when you submit it, it's going to call this sign up function. Now, Supabase has an auth method called .signup that you invoke. You need to pass it an email and a password, and you also give it a redirect URL, which I'm saying just redirect back to the same domain that the person was on, right? So in our case, localhost 3000. If you're deployed to production, you have, this would be your domain or whatever. So as you saw, when you do this, it actually sends out an email, and you have to go and confirm that email. When you do, it redirects you to this URL. It puts a code in your header like we saw earlier, which is right here. This is like a one-time code. And because we're using the middleware function, this behind the scenes will basically take that code from your query string, parse it, set up a session, and you should be good to go. That is basically all you have to do. Now, how do you actually use the session? So now let's talk about like, how do I get information from the session once you have signed in, okay? So the first thing I'm gonna do is I'm gonna look at the layout. And what I'm doing on the layout is this is a server-side rendered layout, which every time a endpoint is hit, the layout is going to be invoked. And we're gonna basically try to get the user information from the session. If you hover over this Supabase auth get user, you'll see that it says get the current user details if there is an existing session. So if you see here this create client, this comes from a lib Supabase server file. And I had to set this all up here to be able to access Supabase. Again, this is all kind of documented in their documentation, so don't worry too much about it. But the reason I'm doing this in the layout is because, have you ever used a website where like you load the page and then like after half a second, a button disappears or a button changes or something? In fact, let me show you. This is an example of why server-side rendering is actually so good. Watch when I go to Gumroad, you'll see that there's a button that kind of disappears when it realizes that I have a session signed in. Okay, it goes kind of fast, but you'll see that there's like a login button. But then behind the scenes, whatever is running realizes that I have a session on the front end, and then that button gets deleted. Also, dashboard, I believe, it says start selling, and then it gets switched over. So this is a symptom of single page application, I believe, and checking for session on the front end, which is why I'm doing the session on the layout, right? This runs on the server. I'm checking to see if there's a session. If there is, I pass that user into my navbar. Okay, so navbar is a client-side component. It's a client-rendered component. You can see here it says use client at the top. And I pass in that user, which could potentially be null, right? So I pass in the user, and then I use that information to determine if I should show the user profile with the avatar here, or if I just don't show it, right? So if I refresh my page, you'll notice that there's no flickering other than the image trying to load, but there's like, it doesn't have to take time in the UI to like check, okay, is there a session? And when there is, React has to re-render and then it hides some stuff, right? So hopefully that makes sense. So that's what I'm doing on the layout, which passes that user information to the front end. But you can kind of call get user on any of these subroutes too. Like if you are on a client component, you could actually say like supabase.auth.get user like this. And if you import the Supabase browser one, which again, this is a different file, this is exporting a function called create pages browser client. But it's kind of the same deal, right? You can get the session or the user that's part of that session on your client components if you want to, like this. But I decided I'm just going to send it in so that there's no flickering. And then I basically can use that user to show different things. So for example, I'm saying use user.email here, and that is how I'm showing the email. So how does logout work, right? How does sign out work? If I click the sign out button, that is going to clear my session and it's supposed to refresh my page. There might be a little bug there. Let's see what's happening. Yeah, I'm going to manually refresh it, but there might be a little bug. All right, so looking down here, there's a sign out button. When you click it, it does a Supabase auth sign out. And really what I should probably be doing is I should be refreshing this header a little bit. Right now, it's not really refreshing the header. So I think right now the reason it's not refreshing is because I have this defined here, which is passed in as a prop. And since this is a closure, this is never being updated. So when you call sign out, React doesn't know to like reload anything, right? So one quick little hack you could do is just reload the page on sign out if you want to. Not the best approach. I think a better approach would probably be come in here and add a provider so that the user state is actually shared inside some type of React state. And that when you call sign out, it'll actually clear that out and React will know how to re-render. But again, this is still like a work in progress, but I'm going to sign in one more time just to make sure this works. So now if I were to click sign out, notice that it does refresh the page and that clears out my session. Not the best user experience, but hey, it gets the job done. So if you do want to fix the issue I kind of just said, you kind of have to use like an auth provider and you have to have the user stored in state. And there is a way to basically listen using Supabase auth on auth state change so that when you sign out or sign in, you can kind of just set the user or set it equal to null. And because we're using state to keep track of the user in the session, the client side of React knows how to like reload and refresh. Again, this is like obviously a little bit more complex to set this all up, but I'm assuming Supabase has like documentation that explains that. The last thing I wanted to show, which I think is pretty interesting, is if you go and run the Supabase start command, right? So this will load up a local Docker development setup. You can go to your studio URL. So if we go here, and you can kind of view all the users. So if you go over here to authentication, you can see that I have this user here, right? Pretty cool. You can kind of manage this user from this page. You could send out a password recovery link. You can send out a magic link. I don't think I've dealt with the magic link stuff yet. I'm sure it's not too hard to get set up. And of course, you can always delete the user. So now if I were to delete this user from this UI, I should no longer be able to log in to that web dev Cody account. So let's just try it just to make sure. Yeah, so we get invalid login credentials. So that's all I wanted to kind of share with you today. Hope you guys enjoyed learning a little bit about how to do authentication in Supabase using an email password login flow with the confirmation emails and running this stuff locally. All right, so that's all I got for you in this video today. So have a good day and happy coding.